Today we're celebrating World Children's Day, and here at Tomorrow we wanted to mark the day by inviting one of our favorite climate activists, 15-year-old Selma Montgomery from Fridays for Future here in Denmark. And we simply asked Selma who she wanted to share a conversation with. And she thought the Danish, Icelandic artist Olafur Eliasson and his work around climate change would be inspiring to know more about. And Olafur, he liked the idea. So now I'm very happy to welcome both of them to this conversation between generations. My name is Marie Goodwill, and I frankly cannot wait to learn more about activism and art and how it can speed up climate action. So let's dive in. Right next to me is Selma Montgomery. Hi, Selma.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much for coming. Selma, you've been involved with Fridays for Future for a year and 3-4 months at this point?
Yeah.
Something like this. But you're also in 9th grade at an elementary school here in Copenhagen. How do you find time for both things?
Well, it's hard, it's not easy, but I think that to me, climate activism is too important to not go to the streets and fight for a better world. So it's not a matter of like, if I can find the time, it's a matter of like, I need to find the time. And I'm quite privileged that I don't have to like work to earn money or anything else. So I have the time.
We like that a lot. And Olafur Eliasson, welcome to you as well. And
Thank
you for accepting the invitation.
I'm excited about it.
Great. I think most of us know you as an artist, Olafur, because your work has been shown and celebrated, I would say, in so many countries around the world. But you're also someone who's very invested in climate action, so much that you last year were appointed UN Global Ambassador to their development program. It's called UNDP.
Yes.
What is it like to be a Goodwill Ambassador?
It's a good question. I think it gives you the decisions one takes, gives them a little bit more gravity, because I'm afraid of making mistakes, spoiling the good name of the UN on one side, but on the other side it also gives, sort of formalizes the trust that UN apparently had in me to carry out a message, and I'm very proud to do that. And I am, I was thinking about how do I serve that in the best possible way, because obviously in the beginning I thought, I have to do all kinds of things, not finding out very quickly there's lots of things that I'm not so good at. So I realized, I should probably not do that, because there's so many people who are good at that. So I said, maybe I should just do what I'm good at and then do that as good as possible. So as a matter of fact, it's not really changed a lot, but it gave a certain mandate to do what I already did.
Mm. All right, you two, we are going to learn much more about the work that you both do for climate action. And on top of that, I'm also curious to see what a young activist and an established artist can learn from each other. My gut feeling tells me it's quite a lot, so we'll see where we end up. But Selma, I want to start with you, and I'm curious to learn more about the activism that you do. So I was wondering if you could take us back in time, a year and those 3-4 months back in time, and share with us why you started doing activism with Fridays for Future.
Yeah. So I think that as a young person, at this time in human history, you have this fear of the climate crisis, because you know about it, you learn about it from established media, from social media, a bit from school as well. But it's a very distant relationship, at least for young people in like places like Denmark, the climate crisis. Also, because I think it's also sort of a coping mechanism that you don't want to face the climate emergency, because it's simply too scary. So I think I sort of knew that there were like a climate crisis and all that, but I didn't really face it. It didn't play a big role in my daily life. But then when Fridays for Future and Greta Thunberg and all this started happening across the globe, where young people went to the streets and protested for their future, I sort of found like a community where we could face the climate emergency together. And I think that helped me a lot to sort of or not been given, but like creating this platform for young people to speak up and about the climate crisis. So that helped me face my own fear in that community of young people.
And I have to ask you, what kind of work is it that you do? What does a week look like to a young activist?
Yeah. So like my week can be very different from like my fellow activists' week, but we do campaigns. Of course, we strike and demonstrate and go to the streets. We meet with politicians and other important people. Talk with the media, sort of do everything we can to get out our message and to organize the power of young people, to like organize in communities so that every young person can find their voice and help with creating a better future, because we think that every single person is so important in this fight. So we want to give a platform to all the young people across the globe who also deserve to be listened to, because it's our future it's about.
And Olafur, I know that you've been watching as Fridays for Future for the past 2 years have been mobilizing young people really around the world and sort of been taking to the streets. And I'm curious to know, what have your thoughts and observation been as you watch the young generation sort of stand up?
Well, I was very touched because I felt that this was a little bit unexpected, and also there was this notion of the future, which somehow became closer suddenly, because the future evidently is so abstract. It's even hard to actually imagine what exactly is going to happen, and for someone to somehow give the future a shape and say, oh, it's actually not so far away, and because Selma she has lived, I mean, it's not exactly, I hope, right, but I have as much time left as she has lived, and she has not so much time left as I have lived. So the future is interesting because we have a life, you have a life in front of you, I have a life past me, and I have some in front of me, and you have some past you. So it sounds a little sad, but it's actually all okay. But you have a future that is different than mine. And suddenly I realized when I saw the Fridays for Future that I have a responsibility to involving you in leaving the future so that you can actually live in it. And I kind of had that responsibility already, but now it somehow became more clear. And this really touched me. And then I was really curious about, well, how did you do it? How did you know who know, do know, done, and then this, and then suddenly there was a movement. I think this is so fascinating when suddenly out of, I wouldn't say out of nothing, but out of apparently disconnected people, suddenly there's a movement. And it just showed there was a space in which something had to be said. There was like a void, and suddenly the void was not there and you filled it up. It was like incredibly touching.
Yeah.
How did that come together?
Yeah, I'm wondering that myself, but I think what the young people did was that we gathered around a fear for the future, a shared future, and we gathered around a wish to make a better future. So we had this vision for a better world, and we had this fear, and we also had this, I would almost say, sorrow about the world that we're losing right now, the people that's already being affected by the climate crisis. So all this sort of did so we could come together and create something new by coming together across the globe. And I think it's very interesting because young people, I think, were only like the first ones to do this, because the whole world needs to come together to solve the climate crisis. And the fact that young people could do it, I think that also brings me hope, Because if we can do it, you can do it as well. But I think it's very much gathering around like emotions and visions for a better world that brought us together.
No, that's so true. And young people are not busy pretending being grown-ups. So you are in a situation where you are actually trustworthy. And I always say children never lie, because when they say something, they express the emotional need that they have. And then they don't add to that or take from that. They just somehow say the truth. I mean, sometimes they wrap it in a kind of very glamorous packaging, but if you look through that, it's the truth. And so I really, I'm very interested in this notion of being motivated to creating, to create a we, instead of like grown-ups, they are more like into me, like me. And this notion of we-ness. And of course, we also now know there's many people who do not feel a part of me, we, right? Because they feel excluded for one or the other reasons. But this notion of building a new kind of we that also crosses across political, national, religious, like all these other borders that grown-ups are so busy creating, that children are actually like the wind, able to blow over the border and say, well, you know, the wind goes across the land and the ocean the same. So in a sense, you have, I believe, with this movement, also been very generous in teaching. You know, you're actually giving a lot to people who are stuck in the past, like myself, the so-called grown-ups. And I find this is really inspiring. I really think that you should propose the government to swap. They do Fridays for futures, demonstrate and do something. And then you can take over the parliament.
Yeah, I think
and
we
I'm
would
sure,
be much better
yeah,
at it.
I actually think it would.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. Let's see if we can get that one in motion. Olafur, you mentioned that as you watched the Friday for Futures demonstrations, you had a lot of questions in your head, and I think this is the right time to
yeah,
bring
but
them.
because I'm actually quite fascinated by this notion of togetherness, this notion of, you know, how can we create a space in which we are sharing some values, but we don't have to be agreeing on everything. How can we be together and be different? And in a way, we live in a world where there's so much like, what do you say, us and them, like polarization. Are you here or are you there? Otherwise, if you can't agree, then you're just not a part of it at all. And this ability to be a part of a movement and still feel that you're yourself. How does that feel?
Yeah. First of all, I think that this, with young people, this us, we, them, I don't think we think that way. We think we're facing an existential crisis, like threat, and our intuitive way of handling this is to come together, to reach out to each other. And I think that's a very beautiful thing, that it's not about how can I protect myself, it's about, okay, how can we together do something about this. And also I think that one of the most important lessons I've learned from being an activist is it's so much easier to change the world if you do it together. And you can make such a bigger change if you come together. And I think that's very essential to never feel, because it's scary. It scares me, the state of the world right now, and I think a lot of other youth and children are scared as well. But to find a community where you become who you are doesn't matter anymore. It's sort of the cause, and it's making a better future for everyone, not just you, but for we. And I think that's given me so much as an activist. And also, I think it's very important that we all the time try to seek these communities and these spaces where we can come together. Because that's where the magic happens. That's when all sort of different people come together with ideas and visions and dreams and hopes for the future. That's where the magic happens, and that's where you actually change something. Yeah. And I think that's what we can as a movement.
No, I like that a lot, and this idea of hope in particular, this idea that there is a tomorrow and we can actually build it. All we need to do is face forward instead of walking into the future with your back to it and looking to the past, always saying, oh, it was much nicer in the 70s and then. No, so I like this idea of you are in fact producing hope, and because that seems to be a rare currency in the grown-up world. And so, no, I totally would bet on you. I think there was a number of other movements. There was the Occupy movement. There's the, what is it called? The rebels, what is it called from London? Extinction Rebellion. And the complexity of these new systems and Fridays for Future being so incredibly important. So it's not the result of the private sector or entertainment. It's not at all also a public sector result, right? It's not, a product of anything. It is the youth themselves, and it is so incredible. Now, of course, there has to be someone who listens to you and takes you in, and not just like listen, take a picture with me, kind of listen to you, but actually turns what you say into policies, legislation, and there is that bridge. And I'm very curious about, is the politicians, and that's a question too, are they actually listening? I mean, are they actually listening to you?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. Also, because there's sort of been it's sort of in to be a climate activist right now, to like the youth, to come to our strikes and take photos and post them on Instagram or social media. But this sort of difference that people use us to keep the world as we know it running, to keep the establishment in power. So they sort of also try to drown our voices by sort of embracing us too much. And I think that's what politicians right now are doing. They're like, oh, it's so nice, and it's so nice that you fight for something. And I was an activist as well when I was young. And you're sort of like, yes, but that's not what this is about. It's not because we are very engaged or really like to do this. It's because we feel like we need to do this. We don't have any other choice, because we simply cannot be quiet when the world is moving in the wrong direction. And I think that's very important. And I think also that's something for yourself to reflect on. Like, one thing is to listen, another thing is to act, right? You can listen and you can understand, but do you actually have the courage to act on what the young people are saying as a politician or as a person in power? Because you give some of that power up when you do something for the greater good and for humanity. And maybe you also gain power, I don't know, but it's very interesting.
You take the risk of taking something that is unforeseeable. You don't know what the youth what they're going to do tomorrow.
Yeah.
But if you can live with that risk, first of all, you can become a parent.
Yeah.
Then you can become a politician, or maybe first a politician, then a parent. But I mean, I know, but I'm concerned that the movement is somehow solitary or not fully integrated. But as you are children, it's evidently so that you're going to be around for a long time. So I'm not so worried, and thank you for the great, amazing work you're doing. I wanted to say something about an activist. I met an activist a couple of years ago, and I became friends with him. And when I started art school, he was dangling off an oil rig just south of Greenland. And so I always learned to say, oh, I'm not an activist, because Kumi, my friend, and now I just became my friend, so I said, Kumi, he's an activist. But then later I also learned, well, there's also micro-activism. There's in the moment in the supermarket, you say, I'm gonna buy a toothbrush out of wood. That was like a tiny little activistic choice, So instead of somehow, because I was so fond of how he could hang off an oil rig, because he also can't swim, it was like then he's really into it, right? And he got into jail in Greenland with a Danish policeman, and they're still friends. And anyway, so I think we all can be activism, and the choice is very close. It's not, you don't have to hang in Greenland somewhere. I think you have it right here. You just need to grab it.
Yeah,
How does that sound to you? Is that aligned with your mission?
Yes, I think that we very much need to rethink our idea of what an activist looks like. Because being an activist simply means to do something for the greater good, or to change something. That you, by your actions or what you say or what you do, change a little thing in the world. That's being an activist, and you can be an activist on a daily basis. But I also think, also like this, looking at what are you good at, and you as an artist, you're an activist too, and you do activism with your art and with your talent for making art. And I do activism in another way that's closer to my reality and what I'm good at. And I think we also all need to like look at what resources do I have as a person, what am I good at, and how can I use my talent to create a change in the world. And I think that's a very important way of thinking all the time, like how can I use my gifts and my uniqueness as a human being to create a better world, because we need all sorts of different things. We need people going to the streets. We need people doing art and creating a new language for the climate crisis and the climate emergency. And we need people who's good at science and math and talking and communicating. We need everything. So also making this like a very inclusive movement, so that we can use everyone, and all talents are welcome and needed as well.
And speaking of using everyone and inviting in lots of disciplines, I wanted to broaden out the perspectives and also look at the role that art can play in climate action. And one of the reasons is that, Selma, you told me, or you said something to me a few weeks ago that really surprised me, because you were out on the streets, as we can tell. You spent a lot of your time on campaigning, on speaking to politicians, on getting the message through. But then you said that art is actually really helpful in your work.
Yeah.
How is that?
I think that art helps me find a language for all that I cannot express with my words. Sort of, there's so many emotions and sorrow in the climate crisis, because we're losing this beautiful world. All this is dying around us. We're facing like extreme threats as humanity, and all this is, you're feeling so much, and I think art helps me create like a shared language for all these emotions that we can also gather around, and that sort of unites people around a feeling or a vision in a more poetic language. And I think that's very essential when we talk about the climate crisis, because it becomes so abstract. It's far away, but art makes it closer to us. It makes us feel it in a more personal way. And I think that's what's so beautiful about art, and why it's so important in the climate fight.
So making it more personal and more close. In your experience, what role can art play in
No, I mean, I think, Selma, you sort of said it also. That's nice. So when you're done, you can always come and work in my studio, because that's exactly how one should say it. No, but the thing is, there is actually many things, and as history moves on, when we look back, it actually there was times where it was incredible to have said what we are saying now, as if it was normal. And we talked briefly about UN. I'm very interested in that UN now has 75-year-old birthday. And then you think about, okay, so the human rights, for instance, are roughly 75 years old, so a little later, right? Why didn't they not make rights for animals and plants? I mean, did they just forget it? Oh, but that was not so busy back then. And now you can sort of say, okay, the next 75 years, who's gonna sort of even make the idea plausible that at the General Assembly over in New York, there's gonna be a seat for animals? And how's that gonna work? And then the goats are gonna sue the lions, and the lions, the people for taking the water, and the water is gonna sue the fossil fuel producers for having created the whole thing in the beginning. And it actually is happening, and it's so interesting, but it's so difficult to understand. 4 years ago, the air in London, they sued the city of London, and they won, because there was more pollutants than it was legal. but there was no one to represent the air. So a law firm went in and said, okay, we represent the air and we sue the city, and they won. So the notion of rights of personhood, and to spread that out into a whole new organized way of respecting the planet we live on, somebody has to give that pictures, ideas, imagination, fantasy, and evidently children are essentially the ambassadors of imagination and fantasy. And the artists are, as some people might say, the last children in the grown-up areas. That's not really true, to be honest. But essentially, so that would mean that this is my more than human friend. Over here, that tree or that plant, it's like you sort of need some water, I think. So artists are making the invisible visible, or the impossible possible, or the possible impossible, you could say also. And so I'm very excited about this idea of making something that is not really tangible, maybe not make it tangible, but at least making it reachable somehow. And it doesn't mean that it is solving everything. It's probably, art makes more questions than it brings answers. But at least someone is asking the question. So art and kids and children and young people have something in common, I think.
And speaking of art projects and climate action and the young generation, your latest project is called Earth Speaker, and it very beautifully unites all of it, I think. Do you want to maybe share?
Yes,
share your
absolutely,
work?
indeed. So I made, on behalf of EU, for all of Europe, so it was a big project for me, which is why I said, how do you call it? So decentralize. Well, how can I reach everybody? It's impossible in Europe. If I put a sculpture in Berlin, it's not going to work. So I made an app, not knowing there was going to be a corona crisis, sadly, but luckily because everyone spent much too much time with their phones. So essentially it's a camera, and I actually have it on my phone, but I'm a grown-up, so I'm not, it's only for young people.
So you're not allowed to leave a message on your
but I
work.
can, I mean, I already told my phone I'm a grown-up, so it doesn't really work. But essentially, you see, it's called Earth Speaker. So for young people to give a voice to that tree. And the tree evidently has something to say. I mean, it's treeing right now. It's asking for water maybe, or something like that, right? But essentially, children who have that extra vision, they can say, oh, look at this wooden floor. This was a forest not so long time ago, maybe 100 years or so, maybe 200 years. And probably someday it's going to be, if not a forest, soil. If it's not coated with 1 million layers of plastic, as some people do it nowadays. But it could also be that it's not, and it's going to be recycled in a proper way and go into a compost circulation and so on. So the app, the idea that the earth speaks, it's not really about giving kids and young people a voice. They have a voice. But to create a platform where young people can express, inspired very much by Fridays for the Future, express themselves, but also express themselves through the floor. It's very clear, this floor is flooring in an oak kind of way, and it's totally chilling right now because we are doing very well. But otherwise, it's really struggling with what's going to happen tomorrow. Well, what's going to happen?
And I know that there are already children in countries around the world that have left messages on behalf of trees and floors and other things. And I also know that you have been looking around on Earth Speaker over the last couple of days, and I think it would be nice to get a review of the work.
Yeah.
What do you think of this project?
Yeah, so first of all, I very much like the idea of giving a voice to the voiceless, or like both the children, but also the plants and the trees and the water and the nature and all around us. Also, when we go back to like talking about what do we value in our society today, is that we only started acting on the climate crisis. It only became a threat when it threatened humanity. But we were already destroying land. We were already killing lots of different species. Like all this was already happening, but because we don't have a language, or we don't value also in our like economic systems and all sort of things, but also like just in the way we look at the world, we don't value the tree or the nature. And this is also what indigenous people have been talking about for a long time, this important that land in itself, nature in itself can have a value and a right to live. And I think sort of that's what Earth Speaker also do. It sort of gives a voice and sort of create a bond between humans and nature and everything that's around us, and give that a soul as well. And then the second thing is that I also really like the idea of children speaking, and these children who give these messages, because I think that children's voices are so important in the climate fight, both because it's our future it's about, so of course we should have a say in the decisions that's already that's being taken right now, because we're going to live with the consequences, but also because I think it's such, I think children are just better at feeling, at emotions, at being sad about the state of the world and the trees dying, like feeling all this that we need to feel connected to the earth that we're living on right now, and that we are killing, or that's killing us. That's sort of how you look at it. And I think that's so beautiful. And that's also what Earth Speaker does. Now it's going to be interesting if people are going to act on what we say, or in Earth Speakers, or if it's again going to be...
I travel around to politicians here and there. I was just with the German president, Mr. President Steinmeier is his name, and I told him, please to tell the children he's listening. And so that's what I say, just say you're listening. At least the least thing you can do as a politician, say, I heard you. You know, because this somehow is missing, that the children know I'm actually being listened to, and that I think and so I like this. You said they're so good at feeling, because I think that if one wants to remain a human or being human, I think it very much comes with acknowledging that I'm actually emotionally feeling something. We are not a data sheet. We need data and science to improve and get better, because if we are only feelings, it could also backfire. But I do think that there is a situation where children are actually more human than grown-ups. Because grown-ups, they have been dehumanized. And so an artist like me, I work with like rehumanizing grown-ups. And a child is like nice, because finally you see the sort of the real thing. Oh, a human, oh, nice. So I like when you say to also dare to say I can feel it. That's why I do it. I just trust my feelings.
I think what you're saying about like politicians listening and acknowledging our message, of course that's nice and important and the first step, but also the world is at a stage right now where we can't afford only to listen. We also need to act on what we're listening to. And so I think that's also very important. So of course the first step is understanding the message, but that doesn't do anything if you're not acting on that message as well. So I think that's also like a very important thing to talk about here.
I actually have a final question, because believe it or not, we're running out of time. Wow. And my final question is really one that I think a lot of people, both kids and grown-ups, feel when they care and are concerned about climate action. And that is this notion that you can easily lose hope because you see maybe political inaction or setbacks, and the current trajectory that we're on can be grim. So I was wondering how you, on a personal level, find the motivation and the hope to carry on your work, that you could share with us. You want to go first, Olafur?
Well, Desmond Tutu, I think, said, I'm a prisoner of hope, which is interesting because, you know, you just have to be hopeful. And sometimes it's a hopeless job to be hopeful. But you can also say, I think, hope and something like hope and love and just this idea of caring is in a way, it's like a, if you think about human rights, justice, the planet, all of that is in a way institutionalized hope. if you take hope and caring for the planet and make it into a system, you get regulations, laws, institutions, the things that regulate stuff, right? So here we have the hope, and it's very important that hope is not the sort of the opposite overcooked pasta versus laws and legislations and lawyers. No, hope and legislation has to be, it's the same thing. It's just hope is a felt version of a law that protects a tree. Do you see? So I'm afraid of the binary world, us and them. I think we have to see that it's actually all one thing.
Yeah.
What is your best?
Yeah. So first of all, I also think that hope is absolutely essential for for humanity in general, but also the time we're at right now, to still have hope even though it looks dark. Also because I think hope is what drives the world. It's the vision about creating something better, and that's what has always driven the world and made the world better. Is people imagining a better world and a more fair and more just world, and I think that's still what drives the world. Like in the big picture, but I also think it's totally fair sometimes to feel that you lose hope, because there is, like, it's very hopeless right now being a climate activist, because you see that countries and the people in power are not acting and are not doing as they should, and we're running out of time. So also to recognize that it's okay to feel hopeless, but to still seek communities and still seek a way to make a difference and make change. I think that's very important.
No, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think
That's beautiful. And I know you want to end it now, but I just want to say
I would want you to give one more comment.
I'm so inspired, and I think we should just occupy this space and just continue. As one should, like breaking the rules is the first rule.
Yes.
Right. The rule number one is breaking it. But the point with hope, I like this because there are so many people creating anxiety and fear, and that is of course the one thing that kills hope, because if you can create anxiety in a whole group like 70 million people, then you can somehow make them so afraid that they go for the no hope version of the future, where there is no reason to care about the planet, to sort of worry for the planet and so on. So hope is also, as you said, we should not take it for given. People lose hope, and it's actually easy to make people hopeless by making them afraid. So the people who are making other people afraid, which is like in a way traumatizing them, that I think is one of the great fears that I have, that they get too much space.
Yeah. Can I make one last comment?
Of course you can.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let's keep going.
I think what's also one of the lessons I've learned from being a climate activist is this idea: are you fighting for something or are you fighting against something? Are you fighting for a better world, a greener world, a more just world for everyone? Are you fighting with anger against the structures in our society today, against the generation that has sort of created this problem for us with that anger? Are you fighting with anger, or are you fighting with hope? And visions? Are you fighting for or against? And I think that's also what I really try to think about in my activism. When am I fighting for something, and when am I fighting against something? And I think sometimes you also need a bit of both. You have a right to feel angry, but as long as you sort of, the overall vision is that you're fighting for something. We're fighting for a better world for everyone, and that's what we need to come together.
And that is a beautiful way of ending with hope, fighting for something. I like that a lot. Obviously, this conversation could go on, and I think it will as soon as we turn off the camera. I really hope so. But for now, I wanted to wish both of you all the luck in the world with your work. And thank you so much for being with us today. And also thank you so much for watching. A strong encouragement to grab your smartphone and check out Earth Speaker. If you're young enough, you can leave a message. And also, if you want to keep up with Fridays for Future, you can find them at almost any social media of your choice. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to inviting you back for more conversations.